Welcome back, everyone. I hope you're doing well. Today we have Historia Civilis with the Iroquois Confederacy. This is going to be taking place in North America. Now I'm so glad that you joined me. This is going to be a fun video. We love Historia Civilis' videos. Let's just jump right in.
On December the 6th, 1811, the New York Historical Society invited former senator and future almost president DeWitt Clinton to give a speech at their annual meeting. Clinton took them up on their offer and used the opportunity to deliver a 90-minute monologue, arguing that the Iroquois were, in his words, the Romans of the Western world. Clinton's overall argument was that New York academia was not spending enough time studying the Iroquois Confederacy. This was true. The Iroquois definitely deserved some serious scholarship, but not for the reasons given by DeWitt Clinton. It was a common trope at the time to draw this artificial link between the Iroquois and the Romans, but in the final analysis,
Why?
this turned out to be reductive and lazy and fundamentally wrong. Today we can do better.
Let's see what we got.
There's a saying that goes, "The beginning of wisdom is to call things by their proper name." The name Iroquois doesn't really tell us anything useful, and the reason for that is that it's not their proper name. The Iroquois are known among themselves as the Haudenosaunee, which means the people of the Longhouse. That should give us a clue as to who these people are. The Haudenosaunee are not one people, but many peoples, knit together by a common culture.
So it's a culture, and that's why we talk about a lot of cultures before. Like the Mississippi culture has several different tribes around the Mississippi River. So I'm imagining it's the similar context of many ethnic groups are derived in a similar tree with another pair of ethnic groups, so it creates a culture. Makes sense.
And political system. The 5 nations of the Haudenosaunee were, in descending order of size, the Seneca, the Mohawk, the Cayuga, the Onondaga, and the Oneida. These 5 nations formed a confederacy, each semi-autonomous, but united under one supranational government. We are going to tackle that government in a few minutes, but in order to understand it, we must first understand the Haudenosaunee's most potent political entity. Any guesses as to what that was?
Wait, what do you say again? Like that last bit?
But in order to understand it, we must first understand the Haudenosaunee's most potent political entity.
Potent political entity. No clue.
Any guesses as to what that was? If only we had some kind of clue. Oh wait, we do. Proper names. They make history easy. For centuries, longhouses were some of the largest and most sophisticated buildings on the continent, with some approaching 100 meters long. The typical longhouse
Is it just like a barracks-style building?
supported 6 to 10 nuclear families, each with their own little section, kind of like an apartment. Families opposite each other shared communal fires, which ran the length of the building. Pay attention because the imagery of the longhouse and the communal fire is going to come up a lot when we get into the Haudenosaunee government. But we're not there yet. First we need to discuss who got to participate in that government, because it's no simple thing. Haudenosaunee society was a matriarchy, meaning that ultimate political power rested with women.
That's interesting. We saw a similar instance with Sparta, with the Spartans, not political power, but like monetary power.
The most important manifestation of this power was in the position of clan mother. The clan mother was basically the head of each family, but in this case the word family had a pretty expansive meaning. The term included the clan mother's spouse, and children, obviously, but also her daughter's spouses, and their children, as well as her own sisters, their spouses, and their children. As you can imagine, a clan mother's family could easily number in the hundreds, which is where the clan part of the name came from.
Okay.
Everybody in a clan mother's extended family were lumped together and thrown into one or several longhouses. On all political matters, the clan mother spoke on behalf of the entire longhouse. This was the most important political relationship in Haudenosaunee society.
So she acts as like a representative, okay.
Each clan mother was empowered to appoint men from her own clan into key political positions. While in these positions, these people became the personal representatives of the clan mother, and through her, the entire longhouse.
Oh.
This meant that she was also allowed to unappoint them at any time, for any reason. Historian William N. Fenton has said that there's no evidence of one of these political appointees ever, let me repeat, ever defying the wishes of his clan mother.
I wonder how succession works.
All political appointees are simply known by the catch-all term, chief. There were 4 kinds of chiefs: civil chiefs, war chiefs, peace chiefs, and sachems. As you can imagine, civil chiefs governed settlements, war chiefs did strategic war planning, and peace chiefs dealt with diplomacy and trade. We can ignore sachems for the moment because we're going to get into that later. The most important thing to remember is that every chief was backed by a clan mother, and that the clans, through the clan mothers, remained the most important political unit. All clans within each nation were arbitrarily divided into 2 groups, which ethnographers call moieties. There's not that much to say about moieties right now, since they're largely ceremonial, but you need to know what they are because they're going to come up later. To summarize, one or several longhouses made a clan, several clans made a moiety, and 2 moieties made a nation.
Yeah, it's like almost like military hierarchy here with like companies and further up. Okay.
Clan mothers picked the chiefs, and the chiefs helped administer each nation. But there's one more thing we haven't considered yet. The actual subject at hand. The fact that 5 nations made a confederacy. The 5 nations of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy met in Onondaga territory and formed the Haudenosaunee Council. Who did this? Sachems. Remember, sachems were the 4th category of chief that I said we'd get into later. Well, buckle up because we're getting into it now. The Haudenosaunee Council consisted of 50 sachems from across the 5 nations. Membership in the council broke down like this. The Mohawk sent 9 sachems, the Onondaga sent 14, the Seneca sent 8, the Oneida sent 9, and the Cayuga sent 10. It would be embarrassing if that didn't add up to 50. No, good.
So I'm guessing this is based off size?
Under the Confederacy, the 5 nations considered themselves one family, living under the same longhouse. This symbolism was extremely important. The Mohawk were the founders of the Confederacy, and as such, they were recognized as the theoretical eldest sibling of this theoretical family in this theoretical longhouse. The Onondaga were recognized as the middle sibling, and the Seneca were recognized as the youngest sibling.
Interesting.
Then, for a change of pace, the Oneida and the Cayuga were recognized as another set of child siblings, with the Oneida being the elder and the Cayuga being the younger.
So I'm guessing it's hard. These 2 strings have better relations with these two string individual nations, and then it's almost like superpower, sort of superpower, not a superpower, in relation of like United States superpower, United Kingdom sort of superpower, Czech not really superpower, and that sort of, I'm guessing that's kind of like how the hierarchy is derived. Power.
Wasn't just for fun. The exact positioning within this family was the end result of some tough negotiations and would have real-world implications. I explained moieties a minute ago, and that's going to come in handy now. This family structure divided the 5 nations into 2 moieties. The Mohawk, the Onondaga, and the Seneca formed the senior moiety, and the Oneida and the Cayuga formed the junior moiety. Remember how different nuclear families would come together to share a fire in the middle of the longhouse? That conceptual framework came into play here. council meetings took place around the eternal fire of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy.
That's pretty cool.
As hosts, the Onondaga Nation was entrusted with maintaining this fire year-round.
By the way, there needs to be more media shows, movies around Native American, like, politics and intertwining relations. I think there's not enough. I really don't. I think there's just so much literary elements and YouTube elements that just create a disparity in the volume between this and like colonial media. And I'm not saying that from like a social justice perspective. I'm saying that more in terms of like, it's interesting. It's so interesting. Like just hearing there's an eternal fire in the middle of this confederacy, and these nations go and meet there and they discuss at large different issues or different things. That's just so interesting because there is substance.
During actual council meetings, for both symbolic and practical reasons, the job of maintaining the fire fell to the 14 Onondaga sachems, who sat in the center of the longhouse, closest to the fire. In the literature, these are sometimes called the Onondaga Firekeepers. The two remaining nations from the senior moiety sat together on one side of the fire, and the two nations from the junior moiety sat on the other. Let's get into how the council worked. Step 1. Somebody introduces a thing. Am I going too fast? This would normally be a foreign policy thing, so for the sake of clarity, we're going to pretend that one of the Mohawk sachems introduced a peace treaty or something. Step 2. Whichever nation brought the proposal would debate the issue among themselves, with everybody else looking on. Multiple speakers were given a chance to make their case, but eventually, the sachems within that nation had to come to some sort of consensus. Without consensus, the proposal died. Step 3. Once a consensus was reached, the question got passed to the other nation within the same moiety. In this case, since the Mohawk were in the senior moiety, that would mean the Seneca. For the time being, the Onondaga Firekeepers remained separate from this process. Within that sibling nation, the same process played itself out.
It seems like this would take a while, actually.
There was another internal debate, and again, speakers got a chance to make their case.
Like, what happens if, like, it goes red? Does it just fall flat on the floor? Do these nations not talk to each other?
Just like last time, the question could not proceed until there was a consensus. Now, it starts to get complicated. If the two nations within the same moiety came to different consensuses, they would have to start the whole thing over again. Step 4. If that moiety reached a consensus, the issue got kicked across the fire for the other moiety's consideration. That moiety, in this case the junior moiety, would debate as one, and the issue would not proceed until they reached a consensus. However, and this is key, the two moieties did not have to reach the same consensuses. Just to keep things interesting, we're going to pretend that that happens here. Step 5. Finally, the Onondaga Firekeepers got to weigh in. As the host nation, they got to position themselves
Are they like the tiebreaker?
as a neutral third party. Just like everybody else, the Onondaga had to reach an internal consensus. Now in this case, where the two moieties disagreed, the Onondaga got to play the role of tiebreaker, and whatever they decided would become the final result. If, on the other hand, we were in a situation where the two moieties agreed, one of two things could happen. The Onondaga could simply endorse the group's decision, simple
Do they have veto powers?
enough, or they could send the question all the way back to the beginning for a second round of debate. If, after that second round, it came back to them again, they had no choice but to agree. Still with me? It's complicated, so let's give a simplified summary. A person would introduce a question, then their nation would debate, then their sibling nation would debate.
What if you just have like it feels like the alignment would be so off though. I don't know, this is just so abstract at this point, and in the world compared to where this was at a time. But it feels like if the Mohawk all agreed, say they all agree, and then the Seneca do not agree. Well, can the Mohawk convince the Seneca? Because it seems like it's like a round robin conversation with the Mohawk, and then it gets past the Seneca without Mohawk intervening to Seneca. Or does Mohawk get to maybe portray different POV to the Seneca within the next round? I'm not sure. This is interesting though.
Then the other moiety would debate, then the Onondaga would debate and offer their final approval. Each one of these steps required internal consensus. Let's consider the implications of a system like this. Internally, the Confederacy was extremely unbalanced. The two most powerful nations were the Mohawk and the Seneca, and nobody else even came close.
That's a huge difference in territory though.
These two nations also happened to be located at opposite ends of the Confederacy. So take a moment and think, which situation would the Haudenosaunee want to avoid at all costs?
Civil War?
It makes sense when you look at the map. What they wanted to avoid was the Mohawk taking one position, the Seneca taking another position, and everybody in the middle being forced to pick a side.
Yeah.
A situation like that can lead to a civil war.
I wonder if those three in the middle have like, imagine this is like a spectrum of policy and people, which it had to be at some point. I wonder if those people in the middle just had like characteristics of one more than the other.
Instead, what did they do? They said, Mohawk, Seneca, the group isn't even going to discuss your proposal until you two agree. If the two heavyweights could not reach a consensus, the smaller nations never entered the debate.
Wow.
A similar thing happened if the proposal came from the other side of the fire.
It seems though like without checks and balances in the system, those two on the left, the Seneca and the Mohawk, will find their own resolves if they cannot push it through this Confederacy.
If there was a consensus among the smaller nations, but the Mohawk and the Seneca couldn't come to terms, the issue was dropped. Nothing happened. What else would the Haudenosaunee want to avoid? Well, you wouldn't want the Mohawk or the Seneca dominating the council, lest you spawn some kind of Mohawk or Seneca empire. So how did they stop this? The council isolated the two most powerful nations in the senior moiety. Remember, the two moieties did not have to agree, so if the smaller nations said one thing, and the powerful nations said another thing, the Onondaga, another small nation, got to break that tie. In other words, if the Mohawk and the Seneca decided to gang up on the rest of the council.
I wonder if they had this much, like, there's a lot of thought into this process, like, between these individuals that created this Confederacy. Like a lot of mathematical thought, too. A lot of arithmetic. Because you have to figure out weight, you have to figure out vote, you have to figure out percentages, and, like, all of that. That's very complex, and it's simplified. It's a complex, intuitive matter, all in one.
So the smaller nations could still bypass them. The council counteracted the imbalance within the Confederacy. It's really a remarkable invention. In the early 18th century, the Tuscarora Nation lost the war against the Europeans, and then migrated north, straight into Haudenosaunee territory. The Oneida proposed offering the Tuscarora full membership into the Confederacy. The Tuscarora were also people of the Longhouse, same language, same culture. It made a lot of sense. Since the Oneida proposed the idea, the Cayuga were consulted next. After some internal debate, they agreed. With the junior moiety in agreement, the proposal was kicked across the fire to the senior moiety, who agreed as well. Finally, the Onondaga firekeepers were consulted. They gave the thumbs up, and with that, the proposal was adopted. In 1722, the 5 nations became the 6 nations. The Tuscarora were adopted into the junior moiety as a new youngest sibling. However, in a move that tells us that the Tuscarora were in no position to negotiate, they were not given any representation on the council.
Better have no taxation. That's interesting though.
Up until the mid-18th century, whenever European settlers wanted something from the Haudenosaunee, they would ask to see their chief. If you've made it this far, you should understand that that's a confusing request. Which chief? Even if they sent somebody, they couldn't make any decisions without first consulting with their clan mother, and they certainly could not conduct foreign policy without the council's approval. This centuries-long miscommunication was completely avoidable.
Well, I mean, let's take a step back. We didn't have Google. So like language barrier was a problem, and there was a lot of assumptions, a lot of territory encroachment, and a lot of firearms. So let's take a step back before we say that. I don't know if it was avoidable. Unless like there's some sort of application that we can practice. Maybe it's more of a conservative approach to the conversations, but maybe you get some translators and you really like I don't know, you have to look at it case by case. You can't just lump it all into one. That's what I gotta say. Like each particular colony prior to being a colony was more or less just pilgrimages, and then after that they started colonies, and they got, you know, obviously support from wherever they came from, whether it be France up north or Britain more down the eastern side of the North American continent. And each particular colony represented themselves, and each colony had certain, you know, so many elements within it. So it's hard to kind of like put this under a macro scale and understand that this wouldn't work. In some cases it definitely worked, in some cases it definitely didn't work.
In 1811, when DeWitt Clinton delivered his speech before the New York Historical Society, academia was just beginning to take the Haudenosaunee seriously. It was long overdue. That's why he devoted so much time trying to convince his peers that the Haudenosaunee were, in fact, the Romans of the Western world. It's unfortunate phrasing, and by now you understand that it's not remotely true. What he could have said is, you should take the Haudenosaunee as seriously as you take the Romans. After all, unlike the Romans, they're still here, still running what can plausibly be called the world's oldest democracy.
That is not fair to say at all. It's not like the Ostrogoths and the Vandals resettled the Romans in territory. They sacked. So the Romans definitely did survive. They're in some ways and some not. You know, they moved to Eastern Rome and they survived another 1,000 years under the Eastern Roman, into the Byzantine Empire. And then there was the papal state set up, and there was, I mean, nothing is the same as it was. Like the Egyptians are not the Egyptians of 3,500 years ago or 4,500 years ago. You know, the Albanians, the Armenians, not our Albanians, but specifically the Armenians, the Indus River Valley, like these are not the same people. There is so much assimilation and merging of cultures and peoples that things become more than what they were. They become mixed, and DNA mixes. That's why, like, if you go 10, 15, 20, 30, 50 generations back, you kind of start, you know, the tree looks weird. It's not as vertical, it becomes horizontal because you have so many cousins and it drifts, and that's why Charlemagne is like the head of most of medieval Europe. There's just so much, like, it fleshes out so differently. That was long-winded, but basically yeah, it's hard to say anyone is still here, or anyone, and if they are still here, they had grace. There was a lot of grace. That was it. Well, I will say, love the video. This is really cool. Did not know that the Iroquois was a matriarchy. Was a lot of Native American confederacies, which there were. You know, you had people sporadically through California and Montana, and you had, you know, people all through Canada. You have the Mississippi Valley. You have, you know, into Florida as well. Not to speak even on the Mexican side or that as well. So I'm wondering if they had similar hierarchies as this. I'm guessing they had to have to kind of survive, because you have to have some sort of like intermingling interpersonal politics like this. So, but this is cool to like really see like, okay, what is a clan mother? A clan mother is someone that observes the clan as a whole, more or less like the advisor or the top dog, if you want to say. But then it fleshes out to like what is a civil chief, war chief, peace chief, and a sachem. And of those, which are handpicked by the clan mother through through traditional means and skilled means, those individuals, the sachems, are then sent as almost internal state representative diplomats to this thing called the council, which has 5 nations within, well, not 5 nations, 5 nations within a confederacy. Then you have the Onondaga as like fire keepers, which is more traditional. It feels like more of like a level headset. It's just really cool. I'm nerding out about it. It's really cool. Guys, want to learn more about stuff like this? This is like blind spots of history that is, you know, when we think of it, and I'm going to tell you like real quick, like when I think of Native Americans, you know, what are the first things that you think of? You think of the Pilgrims, Thanksgiving, the Trail of Tears, like these Indian reservations, struggle, buffalo population demise over the last 500 years. And I would say last 500 years, like 1300 to 1800. But there's so much more. There's so much more. I actually have an opportunity to visit, you know, a site that's been around for hundreds or even thousands of years on the Mississippi. As you guys, maybe if you follow my videos, you might know that I live in the United States. I live in the southeast United States in a state called Alabama. I live in a metro, and I'm not doxing myself. I'm just letting you guys know 100%, like the transparency here. I live in you know, in a area that's called Tuscaloosa. Tuscaloosa was a more or less the people itself, and there was a chief Tuscaloosa. I live off the Black Warrior River. There's a lot of Native American like, whether it be Alabama, which is based off the Alabama River, which is based off the Alabama like people, and then like the Tuscaloosa, Chief Tuscaloosa. But anyway, there's a if you guys have time, search up Moundville, Alabama. Moundville, Alabama. It's the name asserts itself. Mounds, like there's mounds, right? And that's the Mississippian culture. And there's a great archaeological site here, like 45 minutes away from me. And it really shows like a lot of this culture and how it kind of like is perceived in their day-to-day. The mounds are still there, the geoliths. It's really cool. Really cool. That's all I got to say about all that. Appreciate you guys watching. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. We got more videos coming. Peace out. Bye-bye.